Hello everybody, it is I, Introspection, the one destined to compete against even the most successful of VTubers. That's right, Gura. I'm coming for you. Okay, now that I'm done fantasizing about a world where I could actually compete with these VTubers, let's get to the topic at hand. Today I decided to do a philosophical review of the Berserk trilogy. Now, normally when I do a philosophical review, I stick to just the one movie. But because of the nature of this, trilogy, I didn't think it was fair to do just one of the movies, because you're really not going to get the whole picture unless you look at all three. So for that reason, I thought this was the best course of action. Now, a couple more disclaimers I want to give. First of all, I know that this looks like a cartoon to some people. Please do not think that it is for children. It is very, very much not for children. Do not show this to children, okay? Alright. Next, I also want to say that I am focusing on just the trilogy here. I am not talking about its source material. If you didn't know, it comes from a manga. And the manga is way more in depth. I haven't read it, but I know that the trilogy, it's not the original story. It comes from somewhere else. But I'm focusing on just the movies themselves. How do they stack up as philosophical movies? Alright? So I just want to make sure everybody knows that before they think I'm bashing the entire series. So, I'm going to be honest with you. My impressions of the entire trilogy was meh. Really? Like, it was entertaining enough for me, but it wasn't great, if I'm being totally honest with you guys. So, let's go ahead, we'll go over a couple of the points, and we'll see where we can get to from there. So, here's the thing. Watching the movies, the visuals were great, the voice acting was great, all of the things were great, except for the actual core storytelling. That was not good. It wasn't terrible, but it was not good. Now I'm gonna draw a comparison to a movie, and I need you guys to not freak out on me, okay? Now, I know that this is going to sound bad initially. It is. But just let me explain myself, and I think you'll see what I'm talking about if you just hear me out, okay? So, please don't freak out on me. I cannot emphasize this enough. I want to compare it to the Avatar: The Last Airbender movie. Please, I can already hear the boos. Before the comments before this video is even posted, I can already hear the boos. But just hear me out, okay? Now, again, like I said, in almost every respect, this series of movies is really good, except for in the storytelling. So obviously, in almost every respect, it is way, way better than the Avatar: The Last Airbender movie. But what I want to compare it to is the actual storytelling part. A lot of people may argue that the real reason the trilogy didn't do the source material justice is because you're trying to cram a ton of manga into a 3-part or 3 movies worth of story. And admittedly, that would be challenging, and even if they did cram it, it probably wouldn't do the source material justice. But here's the thing, I didn't really feel like they crammed much of anything. It's like, again, the Avatar: The Last Airbender movie. If you looked at the source material, the original, I don't know if it's an anime or not, that's under heavy debate within the community, but the original TV show has a ton of story development, it has a ton of character, the characters themselves have a ton of personality, it can be comedic, but will still also follow a serious plot. But when you watch the movie, it's not even like they tried to cram in the entire series into that movie, or rather they were just doing the first 1/3, I believe. But it's not even like they were trying to cram in that 1/3. It's more like it's like a vague idea of the original trilogy. It's almost if somebody watched the original source material, wrote down a brief, 2 to 3 paragraph summary, gave it to the director, and that's all they really had to create the story of the movie. That's almost like what I felt happened in Avatar, or the last Avatar: The Last Airbender. Plenty of stuff wrong with that movie. But one of the things that annoyed me above all else is that it wasn't even trying to bring in as much from the original source material as possible. It was just this vague idea of the source material. And watching Berserk, that's what I felt like. Even though I had never seen the source material, because I have not read the manga originally, even though I haven't seen it, I could already tell there was just so much not there. Again, it's like somebody gave the director a summary, and that's all they had to go on to create the movie, which wouldn't surprise me if that's what actually happened. And this is important because this doesn't just reflect how much of the source material made it over, but also just how much of the philosophical ideas I feel like this movie or these movies were trying to convey. Like that was all lost because, again, they weren't really bringing in the principles. They were just kind of vaguely referring to the principles the original story was trying to push. I mean, even take the main character, his name is Guts. All right? And watching him, it drove me bonkers when I saw the first movie, because what happens is, and I'm going to warn you, there's going to be a fair bit of spoilers, so if you want to watch this movie without some spoilers, I suggest you go watch it, come back. But if you're still here, the first thing that happens is that Guts is recruited by another character called Griffith. He is recruited reluctantly. He does not want to go. He kind of just made a bet and lost. But then after a 3-year point, he is like really fond of being recruited. After being recruited, he is with a group of people, and he is really fond of being with a group of people. He does not want to leave them. He wants to protect them. But that 3-year period, that is so, so crucial. Like, even just, I believe this happens, I want to say, within the first quarter of the movie. So we're at the beginning of the movie, roughly. And already I realize that a huge chunk of what was so important to the main character is just cut out. Because we immediately jump over the 3 years where Guts is required, or not required, but the actual growth of the character happens. Like, there's just this huge change in Guts' attitude toward everybody in the movie. This major change. And that's a huge part of his character, yet we never actually see it. That's 3 years. 3 years of development that we do not see. And again, it's not even like they tried to cram it in. Like, if they had tried to cram it in, you would have had a couple really quick scenes where you showed Guts throughout this whole process. That would be trying to cram it in. They just completely skipped over it. So immediately I knew I was already missing stuff. And then when I started talking to somebody who was actually really invested in the manga and had also already seen the trilogy, the more he talked, the more I realized that I was right. This is missing a ton, and not just story. Again, philosophical principle, which I know I haven't gotten to yet. Just give me a second, I'll get there. But I'm going through this, and again, it's almost empty, I guess would be a good way to describe it. To give you an example, Guts, another main part of Guts' character development is his father. His father is a huge portion of his character development. But you only get like this very, very short clip. And if you don't already know what happens in the story, you're not 100% sure what is going on. Like, I thought I knew what was going on. So then when my friend was like, oh, did you see this scene with his father? And when the way he described the scene, I didn't realize it was that scene that he was talking about. So I said no. So he directed me to the portion of the movie that actually showed me that scene. And I'm like, oh, that's what was happening in that scene. Because there's literally next to no detail in that small scene. And he's even talking about like the name of his father. He's giving me step by step because he's read the manga, and the scene portrays almost none of this. Like, the only way you were going to know this was what was happening is if you were either really, really, really intuitive, or you had already read the books or the manga, or at the very least had watched the previous anime. That's also something I haven't seen, but if you had at the very least had that, you might have had a better idea of what was going on. So, and that in itself is actually a big philosophical principle, because a lot of the character arc here is that everybody had a torturous life, and the movie, I think, was actually trying to show how, well, not the movie, but the actual source material, I believe, one of the things it tries to do is show how we can all have very difficult lives, but it affects us all differently. Like, I noticed that the brief portions that it gave me about the background of the main characters, they all had very similarly harsh lives. Like, the struggle that all the main characters went through in their past weren't too far off from each other. So I think, but all the characters are very, very, very different. So I think one of the things that the original series tries to show you is that even if we all had similar struggles, it can affect us very, very differently depending on what kind of person we are. And the movie just basically just brushes by this. And again, I haven't seen the original, or I haven't read the original manga, but I can only imagine that the original manga goes into this in far more detail. The movie does not. So that's one philosophical principle that it just does not hit. And I don't even think that's the primary one. And then there are a couple other things, which I'll get to in a second, but going back to the actual portrayal, like, one of the important things that you have to do in this kind of movie is that you need to make the audience care about the characters. If you do not care about the main characters, that you really don't feel it when something happens to them. Again, spoiler alert, but at the end of the trilogy, a lot of the semi-main characters die. And when I was talking to my friend, these characters were supposed to be huge deals in the actual manga. These are characters that you really, really care about. But in the movie, they almost get, like, no screen time. Like Pippin. Pippin in the first movie, Pippin's like this big, broodly guy, which, based on his character design, it seems like he's like that big softy that's a really strong fighter that would defend anybody with his life, but cares very deeply and has a really big heart. But just based on his character design, that's what I'm guessing his character arc is. I have no idea, though, because as far as I can recall, and I actually rewatched the first one to try to get prepared for this video, but as I'm, like, making my way through the second one, I'm like, I can't do this. It was moderately fun the first time, because I really didn't know what was going to happen, but now that I knew everything that was going to happen, all sense of joy had just been sucked out of it. But, again, back to Pippin. Pippin in the first movie, if I recall correctly, because that one's the one I rewatched, the only mention you have of Pippin is when the main female character, which for the life of me I can't remember her name off the top of my head, and I know people in the comments are going to yell exactly what her name is, but she turns to Pippin at the dinner table and says, "Poor Pippin taught me off." I believe it was something like that. And that's the only mention you have of him throughout the first movie. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, between the second and third movie, you really only get anywhere between, like, 3 to 5 minutes of Pippin. So when you get to, like, this big final battle scene at the end of the movie, Pippin has this really, the movie really focuses on Pippin when he dies, because it's a very gruesome and very focused death. Like, this isn't just a background thing. Like, the movie wanted you to focus on the major sacrifice that Pippin made, because he puts himself in harm's way in defense of his allies, and that's how he meets his demise. And so this was supposed to be a huge, like, heart-wrenching moment. But I barely knew who Pippin was. I had seen him for, like, a total of 3 to 5 minutes. I really didn't care a whole lot. Like, when he died, I felt the same way as when any other background character died, because really, I think he only had, like, a couple lines of dialogue. Like, he did not have that much. So, and, like, again, like, the dialogue that these characters share that's supposed to come with a huge philosophical principle is lost. And that's why I keep referring back to how much the movie had lost, because it doesn't just lose the story, you lose the actual philosophical principle that I was kind of hoping to get out of this trilogy. Speaking of which, let me actually get into the philosophical principle. I know I keep referring to it, not talking about it. One of the main things that I only realized that the movie was trying to bring this principle into it after I had talked to my friend. The philosophical idea of causality, which, in a nutshell, this is like the simplest possible way I could put it. Basically, it's the discussion of, do we control our own fate, or is everything destined to just happen, right? If you've ever seen like those movies where characters will invent the time machine to like go back and try to fix something, but when they went back in time, they ended up being the thing that caused it, so no matter what they did, it was inevitable that the thing was going to happen. That kind of deal. So that's causality. And the movie here, or the trilogy of movies, is supposed to address that. But it does not. See, for the movie to actually address this, you need to address the possibility of there being another outcome, which really it does not. Ever. Now, again, I'm assuming that in the original manga, it actually does. It actually does. But in the movie, it does not. Like, throughout the movie, you really only see, at the beginning of the movie, where Griffith is told he is destined for something. We have no idea what. We have no idea. Like, it just says, you are destined to conquer the world somehow, some way. God, king, who knows. You are just destined for this thing that is apparently very bad and demonic. That's it. And then at the end of the movie, there is a brief mention, which if you've seen it, demons kind of come into play in all this. And then one of the demons like, even us as demons cannot predict the future. Something like that. And that is it. That is the only brief mention of causality there is. Now, don't get me wrong. You don't need to have a time machine necessarily to address causality, for sure. One of the movies that did this perfectly, if you know what, if you want a movie that really, really tackles the scientific and philosophical idea of causality, a really excellent one is Arrival, because it does this it's a movie. I'll give you the premise really briefly, and I might actually do a philosophical review of this one as well, because this is actually a really good movie I'd like to talk about. But in the movie, it essentially has aliens come to Earth, and they're trying to communicate it. So it's the entire movie is centered around language. But what it actually turns out is that understanding the language of aliens actually allows you to be able to view time itself, because the way the aliens write is the way that they think, and the way that they think is how they think of time, and the way that they think of time is non-linear. The way they think of time, it's very hard to explain without going into like half an hour of detail, but basically the way these aliens anyways think of time is that past, present, and future all exist simultaneously. We're used to understanding time happening linearly, 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, so on and so forth. But the aliens see everything happening all at once. And understanding their language, which actually it's written in a circle, which actually embodies the idea of understanding the entire timeline at once, helps you to understand this whole ideology. And the movie even goes as far as to show clips of the movie out of order but still maintain the cohesive story to really drive home the idea that everything's happening all at once, rather than time unfolding linearly, because the movie itself doesn't even unfold linearly. Again, very hard thing to explain, but this is a great movie that you don't need time travel to very capably explain the idea of causality. Another movie that does this excellently is Interstellar. Now, admittedly, that one does have time travel, but it's not this like weird, cheeky, or not cheeky, but this obvious, oh, time travel, we ended up causing our own death kind of deal. It is a very complex, not complex, but a very in-depth system of showing you just how intricate time can be and how you can affect it by still existing with the other person at the same time. You can affect the past while still technically being on the same point in time. So these are two movies that, again, for me to properly explain, we'd be here for about 20, 30, even a couple more hours. But they address causality very excellently. And it is because they're addressing the possibility of other outcomes, or they're addressing the possibility of a different form of time. And this movie does not do that. It just briefly mentions it at the beginning and the end. And that's about it. And they don't really even mention it per se. It's just like you could technically sort of kind of interpret that as causality. But that's about it. That's about it. It really does not. And again, the source material, I'm sure, does. Trilogy, no, nah. And like the other thing, however, the one thing I will commend this movie for. I know not everybody agrees with this. I know this is a huge debate within the Berserk community. I am very, very, very convinced that Griffith, the other main character, is a certifiable psychopath. Now, before people freak out, I wanna clear something up, because there's a really big misconception behind the word psychopath. People, the way a lot of people use it, because people don't really know a whole lot about psychology. People tend to use it for just to be synonymous with evil or crazy person. That's not what that means. That's not what psychopath means. I mean, it's true that there are a lot of psychopaths that are criminals, but a very, very large portion of psychopaths are not criminals. They're not dangerous. What a psychopath is somebody who doesn't process others' emotions the same way a normal human being does. So they work a lot more on just sheer logic and what necessarily benefits them. So that doesn't mean that they're going to break the law because they don't understand the law. They actually, a lot of them tend to be very smart. They just don't take things under consideration the same way your average person does. And that's what I think Griffith is. So from the beginning, he's not necessarily an evil person, but I think from the beginning he is a psychopath. Because really, he doesn't care a whole lot about anybody. Except for Guts. Guts is the exception. But for the most part, he really doesn't care about anybody. And we know this because later in the first movie, toward the end of the first movie, he goes over what he believes is a friend. And basically, he goes over, and I'll talk about why I disagree with what his definition of friends is, but he points out that none of the people who actually follow him are his friends. And at that moment, my thought is like, okay, you mean to tell me that the people who completely believe in you have waited on you hand and foot, who are only here because you convinced them that this was the right course of action, and they have complete faith in you. You do not consider these people your friends. Because I really think it, and he gives I'll get into his reasoning in a second, but I think the core reasoning is because he does not care about them all that much. To him, those people are not people that he holds dear. Those people are just a means to an end. And at the end of the entire trilogy, you see like this flashback where he's like on top of bodies, and he's like, well, this is what I have to do to get there. I think that further drives home the point that he really does not care that much, if at all, about anybody who's there. He's just has those people, and he convinces them that he cares, because psychopaths are pretty good at convincing people because they understand fundamentally how emotions work. But he convinces them that this is the best course of action. He doesn't care about them. He just convinces them that he does care about them. And now, sorry, I'm stuttering a little bit here. But this is why I believe Griffith to be a psychopath. Now, to get into his actual definition of a friend, okay? He defines a friend as somebody who follows his dream despite going against himself. That is not what a friend is. As I'm sure most of you probably already have your own reasons for a friend, and I'm sure our definitions differ slightly, but I think we can all agree that that's not a friend necessarily. I mean, that doesn't mean a friend can't follow their dreams. Obviously, you'd want your friend to follow your dreams, but that's not the definition of a friend. Fundamentally, the definition of a real friend is somebody who you know what? This actually is starting to get a little bit more complicated than I thought. So there's different levels of quote-unquote friend, right? You have the normal conversate friend, the person that you kind of just like to hang around because they're there, but that's about it. Then there's people who you'll actually go out of your way to spend time with, and those are just, kind of friends. What I'm referring to here is a true friend, all right? A true friend is somebody who will stick out their neck for you despite it being significantly, if not majorly, inconvenient for themselves. A true friend is somebody who deeply cares for you. A true friend is somebody who will do what generally is best for you, even if it's not something you necessarily want to hear. That's what a friend is. Now, I will say that a friend would generally encourage the other friend to pursue their dreams, regardless of the fact that it may be against what the original person necessarily wants, because a friend would want the best for their other friend. So, yes, it's true that a friend would encourage another friend to follow their dreams, despite whatever inconvenience it may put on to the person trying to encourage his friend, but that's not one of the requirements to become a friend. A friend, fundamentally, is somebody who deeply cares for the other person and goes out of their way to help them, and vice versa. That is a healthy friend relationship. So, Griffith's idea of a friend, like, Griffith's definition of a friend is almost what a friend is meant to encourage you to do, not what you initially have to be a friend. And what drives me a little bonkers, side note here, what drives me a little bonkers here is that when Guts eventually achieves this requirement that Griffith has set to become a friend, when Guts says, okay, I am going to follow my own dream despite the fact that it goes against what Griffith is or what Griffith wants me to do. So Guts does exactly what Griffith wants his friend to do. And that upsets Griffith for some reason. What, like, you're Griffith, you're the one who set this. You're the one who made it so that Guts felt he needed to do this to become your friend. Yet this upsets, and what's more, this upset Griffith so much that at the end of the movie, he commits huge acts of betrayal that were completely unnecessary, specifically towards Guts. Like, at this point, he is his enemy. So, somehow, for some reason, the thing that Griffith says needs to happen for him to become his friend turns him into his enemy. So he's not even following his own philosophy here in what's considered a friend. And you might say, oh, well, he needed to kill everybody for his own life. Okay, fine. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about what Griffith immediately does after, which I don't want to talk about. But so Griffith just commits major acts of betrayal, which were not completely unnecessary, because at this point he's just Guts' enemy. He's Guts' enemy. He's not his friend. So to summarize that little nugget of my speech, if Griffith was intended to be a psychopath, I think that's something the movie absolutely nailed, because it was obvious that he really only had one goal. And as I've explained before, I really don't think he very much cared about anybody else. But he was really, really good at convincing them that he did care. That's why they followed him. In fact, I think he was so good that one of the reasons that people believed he wasn't a psychopath wasn't just because they don't necessarily know the technical definition for a psychopath, but also because he even managed to convince some of the audience that he really did care. So I think, again, if he was intended to be a psychopath, they pretty much nailed it. But his philosophy on what a friend is, as I've already explained, I just don't think holds water. Again, it's not what a friend shouldn't do. A friend can do what he suggests. That's not against the friend code or anything like that, but it's not really the definition of a friend. Now, the last point I want to make, I'm not entirely sure how philosophical it is, but I kind of feel it just needs to be addressed. There is this one character, and I think I'm supposed to hate him. I think that's what the story is originally going for, but the way the movie does it, it really doesn't. I can't. I'm totally blanking on his name right now, but he's the guy who just he really doesn't like Guts, so he's kind of just always complaining that Guts is there. If you've seen the movie or watched the manga, you know exactly who I'm talking about. And I think I was supposed to hate him, but the thing is that even though he was there and he hated Guts, he really didn't have much of any impact on the overall movie or the outcome or anything like that. Like, you could remove him from the entire movie and it would have turned out exactly the same. Nothing would have changed. He has literally no impact in the movie whatsoever. It's almost like he's just there to complain for about 30 seconds to a minute, and then he leaves. And then that's it. So I think I'm not sure what, I think I was supposed to feel something when he died in the end of the third movie, because again, that was also pretty focused. It was really centered around him. He did get a fair bit more screen time, but again, that was just kind of like, he came in, he complained, he left. So, like, I don't even hate him. I was just like very meh when his life, because it was just kind of like, okay, he's there, he's gone, there again, gone, okay, I guess he's gone forever now, whatever. So yeah, I think I was supposed to feel something. I think I was supposed to more or less hate him throughout the majority of the movie, but I just didn't. I'm kind of interested to know how this character was supposed to be portrayed in the original manga, so if you read it, go ahead and tell me in the comments below. But yeah, I wanted to make that one final point. Well, guys, that's going to be it for this video. Tell me what you think of this new format, as well as my wardrobe update. I still like my original wardrobe, but I think I like this one a whole lot better. I've learned quite a bit since that original test drive of this format, so I'd like to know if this is any better, any worse, if you like this format, if you hate it. I really appreciate it, because right now I'm just trying a bunch of formats and seeing what works and what doesn't. So, with that said, please make sure to comment and subscribe. I post every 2 weeks, so until next time, hear nothing and listen to all. Bye, guys!